All right. Hey guys, this
Hi,
is
everybody.
Miss Chief, and
Miss Angel Diaz.
we're going to talk to you guys about the prompt that you guys just read. Take it away, Miss Angel Diaz.
All right, we're going to start off with a prompt here, and then we're going to walk you through the passage. And then we've got some more kudos and recs for you and some really good examples. I do have to say that I personally haven't graded all of mine yet. Some of them were completed late. Don't worry, I will get to them. And some of them haven't been completed at all. Remember that these are really just for you to help you prepare for the AP exam. We are only doing Q2s right now, which is what you're going to be tested on. So all this information we're giving you is really just to help you be ready and do your best on the AP exam coming up. So the prompt that we're looking at is the following selection is the opening of Anne Petrie's 1946 novel, The Street. And I want to just note that I know for a lot of you, 1946 seems like a long time ago, but it's really not. This is more of a modern story than like the Henry VIII one we saw, which was from the 1600s, right? So just keep in mind that we are looking at, much more modern times for this, which you will see in the passage itself, right? Read the selection carefully and then write an essay analyzing how Petrie establishes Ludi Johnson's relationship to the urban setting through the use of such literary devices as imagery, personification, selection of detail, and figurative language. So I want to stop right there. Yeah, Ms. Shiva's already taking care of it here. Remember, we have that use of such again, which doesn't necessarily mean we have to use those, but they are telling us these are in here. I do have to say, from an English teacher perspective, when you look at literary devices, imagery and personification, they're awesome, right? Those are so easy to use. What the heck is selection of detail, right? Is like kind of a question mark. I think they're saying, in case you don't know what imagery is, we're also going to be looking for anything that has to do with details, right? But if you're having a discussion about imagery in your essay, you are covering the selection of details. That's what you're doing, right? And then figurative language could include many things, right? Including personification. Metaphor, simile, personification are like the big three of figurative language. So it's like they went very specific with the imagery and personification, and then they opened it up to selection of detail and figurative language, almost like maybe you, in case you don't know what those things are, you would still have something to write about. I do also really want to note this, that relationship piece is huge here, because not only are they telling you these are the devices right here that you want to use to analyze the piece, you need to use those to establish the relationship. Some people did like 100% amazing with the imagery and the personification, like really nailed it, and then did not mention relationship. And so that's definitely going to have you, lose some points. And that relationship piece really is speaking to this idea of why. Why is it that imagery, personification, and figurative language is happening in here? And the why is to establish a relationship. And the more specific that relationship was, and the more accurate that relationship was, the higher the essays for our classes scored. So that's everything for our prompt, all the insights we have there. And then I'm going to hand it off to Ms. Sheep, and she's going to walk us through the first part of our passage.
Nice. All right. So already it kind of jumps in and just tells you some of the setting details, right? It's a cold November. The wind right away is introduced. The wind is introduced way before anyone or anything else. The wind is almost a character of its own, to be honest. But this paragraph basically establishes some of the characteristics of the wind, right? It rattles the tops of garbage cans, sucks window shades, through the top of open windows. It drives most people off the street in this particular block, except for like a few people, but even those people, they're like double bent trying to like fight the wind. And they want to offer the least possible exposed surface to its violent assault. So if you're trying to figure out like the nature of this wind, that term violent assault should really pop out at you, as far as like, okay, we met the wind. The wind has a relationship to Ludi Johnson. We know now things that are characterizing the wind would be like that of a violent assaulter. Then we have more information about the wind, and here's where we start to get that personification, right? Person for short. It finds scraps of paper. It fingers its way along the curb. It even took the time to rush into doorways and areaways and find chicken bones and pork chop bones and pushes them along the curb. So all these like action verbs that you would typically associate with a person, the wind is doing. So more kind of like, just to go back to like this original thing we're looking at, what is this wind? What is the nature of it? More things to support it are all these verbs, right? It like finds every scrap, fingers its way along the curb, and then it even takes the time. Like it takes so much time to do the most bad things to the people out there, ultimately discouraging them from even walking outside. And at this point, some of you might have noticed, like we're in the third paragraph of this whole passage, and Ludi Johnson has not been mentioned once. That is something that probably was challenging, and a few people, more than a few, a lot of you guys were successful in first in your essay just establishing the nature of the wind, and that way you could then connect it to Ludi Johnson in the later in the essay. But this paragraph, it's more personification. It finds all the dirt and dust and grime on the sidewalks. It lifts it up. It makes people have a difficult time breathing. It physically is like wrapping newspaper around people's feet. And it blew back again and again until they were forced to stoop and dislodge the paper with their hands. And then the wind grabbed their hats, pried their scarves from around their necks, stuck its fingers inside their coat collars. So now the wind, like we already talked about it being like a violent assaulter, it's invasive, right? It's not only discouraging people from going outside, but it's like physically invasive. So all from that first half, again, no Ludi, but lots of interesting things about the wind, and even the wind as a character itself seems almost to be self-aware of what it's doing. It's definitely hostile. And again, those words like violent, those verbs are violent too, like prize, blows your coats away from your body. So first half, basically wind equals hostile, aggressive, antagonistic, all those things. All right, take it away, Miss Angel Diaz, continuing on.
Nice. I want to point out just real quick here, one of the things that it mentions towards the end, just before we meet Ludi, is this idea that the wind like literally has fingers. As Ms. Sheaf pointed out, we've seen it find things, and it has a violent assault, but I think that the fingers are interesting. They come up again too, so that's kind of why I'm pointing it out here. At this point, you might have been thinking, number one, you're supposed to compare this character who you haven't even met, and we're more than halfway through, to their urban setting. And it's really interesting because the wind is not necessarily unique to an urban setting. So it's everything that the wind is doing in this setting that's really, really important because you've somehow got to make sure that you answer the relationship between Johnson and the urban setting. So we've got to get there at some point. Okay, so here we go, specifics now. The wind lifted Ludi Johnson's hair away from the back of her neck so that she felt suddenly naked and bald, which I think is a weird combination, but it is like revealing something, right? I do like, and hey, I can relate to this, for her hair had been resting softly and warmly against her skin. In the summertime, not so good, but in the wintertime, long hair, perfect, right? So the wind is somehow causing her some uncomfort, right? Because she's shivering, and what was secure and warm for her, her own hair, is being pulled away from her. And again, like we said over here, the reference to a violent assault, we're seeing some specifics of what that looks like in Ludi Johnson's case, right? So, and then a lot of students made the connection to this naked and like references to her skin as being somewhat sexual in nature. And I don't think we can go as far as to say that this is a sexual encounter in any way, but I think maybe the word is intimate, right? Or somewhat hostile in its intimacy with her. So I think it's really been able to get to her in a really personal way, in the sense that the warmth that she has from her own person is removed from her in this situation. And then she shivered as the cold fingers of the wind touched the back of her neck. And again, that's strangely intimate in there, how the wind's fingers are working their way on her neck. Maybe some of you are thinking of Beloved at that moment, right? The neck is a very exposed part of us, right? And so the idea that the fingers are on there is somehow a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit too much or too close for her. And then explored the sides of her head. I had some students say that this is somewhat childlike, how the wind treats her, but I think that the maybe if that was the only thing right here that we were looking at, I might agree. But when you look at the wind and what she has established, this wind is not playful. This wind is not a nuisance. This wind is a violent assault, as she has already told us. So just to kind of like play it off like, oh, the wind is being a little naughty here, it's not quite enough for what's happening to her. It even blew her eyelashes away from her eyes so that her eyeballs were bathed in a rush of coldness, and she had to blink to read the words swaying back and forth over her head. And this is where we get to, I guess, when you look at a plot structure, we're headed to the climax of our story right here, right? So we've had a lot of conflict occurring. The wind is mean. We've established the wind as our antagonist. We know Ludi is now going to be our protagonist. And now we are headed into the climax of the story. This is her versus the wind, right? Her antagonist. So she's trying to read the words on the sign, and it's swaying back and forth over her head based on what the wind is doing. I have to clear this because it's too messy. And each time she thought she had the sign in focus, right? She's got it almost there in focus. The wind pushed it away from her so that she wasn't certain whether it said there were 3 rooms or 2. And I think that's an interesting detail, right? For Ludi, why does she need 3 rooms and not 2? It's definitely part of the story. It's not necessarily part of the relationship to the urban setting. So I don't think I would concentrate too much on the 2 or 3 here. I will concentrate more on the battle that's occurring between Ludi and her setting, which the wind is part of, right? If it was 3, why she would go in and see it. But if it was 2, why there wasn't any point. So I would say that that's more establishing why it is it's important that she be able to see the sign, is because it will help her achieve her goal or not, right? When you're looking at conflict, we want our like protagonist, our hero, to be able to succeed. And so this getting a room with 3 people, or for 3 rooms, sorry, is her goal, and the wind is stopping her from that goal, right? Even with the wind twisting the sign away from her, she could see that it had been there for a long time because its original coat of paint was streaked with rust where years of rain and snow had finally eaten the paint off down to the metal, and the metal had slowly rusted, making a dark red stain like blood. I think that's an important detail because remember, it's Ludi versus her urban setting. And so not only do we have this violent assault of the wind, we now have this sign that has somehow suffered, right? This sign has been left out and exposed and suffered in this setting, in this urban environment, maybe symbolic of some of the people who live there as well, right? So the idea that it has been exposed to the point that the paint is been eaten off and that it is almost kind of dripping with blood shows the exact amount of assault that the wind can do if you don't find 3 rooms instead of 2 rooms, right? And remain exposed out there in this harsh environment. The next sentence, of course, it was 3 rooms. The wind held still for an instant in front of her and then swooped it away until it was standing at an impossible angle on the rod that suspended it from the building. She read it rapidly. 3 rooms, steam heat, parquet floors, respectable tenants, reasonable. And that's where we end our passage. So was it patience? Was it persistence? Was it a little bit of a concession by the wind, right? Had the wind seen her persistent nature and decided that she should have the right to read the sign? You guys came up with all really good reasons for that. And any of those would work, right? So even if it was she fought the wind, she has grit, she's persistent, that was perfect. If you said that the wind deemed her worthy and for a moment gave her the opportunity to read the sign as somewhat of an initiation into this community or this urban setting, that was fine too. Remember that what we really wanted to establish was the why, and that is going to come from that relationship piece. So did she have to fight to the finish against the wind to get her goal? Did the wind concede and give her an opportunity, right? Those are both okay. They're establishing relationship, right? But the people who got to this section of the sign really were able to get those top points. The people who commented primarily on the personification of the wind and didn't get to the sign didn't tend to get the top scores. You know, it was really hard to get beyond a 3 or a 4 if you did not talk about the sign at all, right? The last piece could be a really good conclusion to your essay, right? 3 rooms, steam heat, parquet floors, respectable tenants, reasonable. And one really brilliant student pointed out in an essay I read a repetition of this word reasonable, that the wind had become reasonable. And that's how she was able to find the room, which I thought was a really clever use of that word and referencing the conclusion here. So she is able to triumph over the wind, either through her own determination or through the wind, you know, giving her that opportunity, whether even how small it was, right? Ms. Shi, if you have anything to add here?
Yeah, that note that you just said that she was able to triumph. A few people said that Ludi was unaffected by the wind because I think all you thought of was, oh, well, she did read the sign eventually, so everything was fine. But we can't ignore like all of this where she was being affected by the wind. She couldn't see the sign. The fingers of the wind were like exploring like her face and her neck. Like these things did affect her. But then yeah, you could have acknowledged then and read like, oh, okay, she made it. Like she saw the sign. It's reasonable. Yeah. And
Perfect. I'm gonna clear this, okay?
oh yeah, go for it.
Okay. So the rest of what we have for our presentation, I don't know how much detail we're going to go into, but we did the same thing. We did kudos. This is what we noticed kids did really well. And then we did some really stellar intros, because I think a lot of people still are wondering what an intro looks like for this type of essay. So you can see one is a little bit longer and one is a little bit more brief, both very good. And the next section was amazing. Body paragraphs, so you can take a look at those as well. Remember that Mashif and I both used green to indicate things that were well done and red to indicate things that still needed some improvement. If you have any questions about anything in red that you want to ask us, you can join the next Zoom meeting, or you can email us separately. We're happy to talk about those. We didn't put a lot of explanation because we were trying to get through essays quickly. And then the next section we have is the conclusion. This is a great one. It answers the so what, the conclusions that made sure to kind of wrap back into the story and talk about why it mattered and what was really going on in that relationship between Ludi and her environment. Those were really, really good.
Well, real quick, I will say this conclusion was great. The essay was great too, but careful of saving your best stuff for the conclusion. Like, make sure your analysis is hitting some of it too. That happened a few times. I was like, oh man, this conclusion, amazing, but like, where was some of this earlier? So make sure you're doing it the whole time. We also have the recommendations page, things to work on. Some of them are tips you've seen from the last time. Some of them are prompt specific.
Can I say a couple of these? I don't want to focus too much on Rex and not talk about kudos, but there are just a couple of things that if you will change, it is going to improve your essay. And one of them is, do not talk about the author's writing ability, because it's never going to be part of the prompt. So it's off topic. And usually you're struggling to figure out what to say about it anyways. But it would be something like, the author does an excellent job here of talking about the wind's assault on people. Well, that's just an identifier, right? That's not really building an argument of any way. We're not being asked to build an argument on how well the author does writing what they're writing. So be careful of that. It takes you way off what you're supposed to be doing, okay? And the other one is, leave the audience and the reader out of it. We said it last time, we're gonna say it again. It is a distraction from the so what, from answering the why does it matter, right? It's a cop-out to say it matters because it makes the audience feel something, right? But that's not really analysis there. And frankly, people feel different things anyway, so your grader might not even agree with what you're saying. So leave that out. Those two things we've seen twice now in two prompts. If you will stop doing those two things, your essays are going to improve by at least one score, right? Just by stopping from those two things. Anything little you want to say, Mashif?
No, I definitely agree with all of that, and I highly recommend you look through all the examples we've pulled, and keep working on these things. We're gonna have one more practice coming up today when we post this. So remember all these tricks and tips, and just go for it. Like, try it out in your essay. You guys have seen there's not like a whole lot to lose. Like, if you try your best, give it your best shot. We're giving you feedback. This is all meant to help you. So definitely do them and try your best.
And in the next prompt, we're going to design it. It's going to be another Q2, so you'll have a passage to read. But the next one will be based on a passage from Heart of Darkness. So we're going to try and use it for both, like be able to talk about the book, but also really give you another good practice.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you for watching. Hope this was helpful, and we will see you soon.